Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. I always think, I wonder if anyone actually will come. I try to write clever headlines, but I don't know if that helps. So I'm Maureen MacLeod. I am one of the department co-chairs for support and wellness at Punahou School. I heard that amazing keynote this morning. That Jenny was darling. I wanted to adopt her. But it's funny because I was talking to my son about this presentation and I'd written 2 versions of it and I didn't like either one. So as I was driving home from the conference last night, I was like, what story do I really want to tell tomorrow? And so then I started redrafting it last night after I had supper with Layla and some friends. And I thought, I need to start over and talk about the journey that we're on rather than try to be sort of impressive and just sort of say, we're in the middle of it, we don't really know what's going on. We've done a ton of research, we've made lots of mistakes, but I'll share with you some of them and then that might help you in your own respective journeys. I labeled it a workshop, but as I was imagining it, especially because of the way it's set up, and we only have an hour, so there's a couple spots where you can kind of talk to your neighbor or think about some stuff, but I identify as an English teacher, so that means I'm much more comfortable with it being interactive rather than standing at the front presenting. So if I say anything that is confusing or you want me to dig deeper or you'd like clarification, just wave, shout, whatever. So I have just kind of a loose agenda, but it's basically how do we get to where we are we going, what research have we been doing, what's our community look like, what are the things we're trying. The principal I report to is Dr. Emily McCarran. She's literally a visionary, and her leadership style is really, she takes feedback amazingly well, but she's also very open, so she gives her team, of which I am a member, kind of broad brush strokes like, go reimagine SEL in the academy, and I'll say, okay, away I go. That doesn't work in all areas of our school, but I think it helps to know that we had a pretty wide berth when we were given this work last summer. That's my student, Emily. She graduated 2 years ago. So I always think of a kid, and that's Nani behind her. She's a senior this year. The story I want to tell you today is our reimagining our SEL journey. It started, I'll tell you about it. So where we're starting, where we're going, what we're doing, and the mistakes we made. And then I'm going to share a couple things that we're practicing and trying this year that seem to be going reasonably well. I think everybody's from Hawaii, but the basics of our school are, we were founded in 1841 by the gift of the Hawaiian chiefs gave land to the missionaries so that they could not have to send their children back to Yale or Connecticut to go to school. I think we've, over the years, have had different versions of how we understand that story. Our most recent school president, Jim Scott, who retired at the end of June, was a Punahou graduate, was our first Hawaiian school president. I think he was only the 4th one since the Second World War, so one of the things that sets us apart from a lot of independent schools is that or even public schools I would think, is that we change leadership every quarter of a century or so. And so the new president, Mike Latham, who started the 1st of July this past year, just 4 months ago, is our second Punahou alum to be, he graduated in 1986 and was most recently the provost at Grinnell College in Iowa. And one of the things that delighted me when I started Googling him and trying to figure out who this new guy was is that one of his signature programs at Grinnell College was a deep investment in social emotional learning for his students. And the first presentation I heard him make at Punahou, he was talking about how it takes a lot of money, takes a lot of thought, it takes a lot of human resources, it is not cheap if you're going to do it well. And anything we do, we're going to try to do well. So I was heartened by that, because you never know when there's like a big change in direction. But he seems to have been selected, at least in part, because of his focus on whole students and well students. So recently, especially since Jim was our president, he really worked with faculty, students, and families to help us think about what does it mean to have like the gift of a Hawaiian heritage in the lands of Punahou, and then the gift of a Western education. And I don't know that we've struck a nice balance of that. But I think that's something I've been there, this is my 16th year at Punahou, and I really feel that in the last decade especially, we've really been trying to think about what does that mean, and in the context of SEL, like as we understand our own stories, we're better able to understand where we're going. And so I think we're headed in a nice direction. Academically, we're 76 acres. The campus is huge. It's not like Kamehameha, but it's pretty big. We're the largest independent co-ed school, day school west of the Mississippi, and we have about 3,700 students, K-12. For me, that means like I have, in the high school there are 1,750 kids, and then K-8 there are 2,000. And we start with 6 kindergarten classes, and then we add 2 more classes in 4th grade, and I think we add 2 or 3 more classes in 6th grade, and then we get up to about 400 kids per grade once you get into high school. So, and that's we add about 80 kids in 9th grade. So we have an abundance of resources, but we also have a massive scale. It's super hard to make anything feel intimate, and you'll hear about that in a bit. So a quick timeline of our SEL journey. In 2013, right around the beginning of the Portrait of the Graduate trend, Dr. Scott was made a presentation on the mainland and he was asked, like, tell us about a Punahou education. What are the markers of a Punahou education? So he wrote this document called The Aims of a Punahou Education. It's on our website. It's really aspirational. I think it's got 31 qualities like, moral action, critical thinking, deep reasoning, elegant and graceful writing, all of those beautiful, like there's 31 attributes, but there isn't a school in the world that would argue against those, or I'd be surprised. So one of the challenges was to figure out, like, how do you enact those aims? In 2016, we're accredited by the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, which in Hawaii is administered through HIS. In 2016, one of the 4 recommendations of our self-study was that we adopt or create a CASEL-aligned K-12 SEL program. And I mean, the WASC recommendations are always interesting because they're not really a criticism of the school. They're saying, in order for you to stay relevant, in order for you to stay awesome or whatever, you need to continue to develop in these 4 areas. The SEL part was interesting. Hi, come on in. The SEL part was interesting to us because I think everybody believed that there was pockets of awesomeness, that there were certain teachers that just knew instinctively how to care deeply for their children, regardless of whether they were teaching them kindergarten or advanced placement math. But then there were also pockets where, especially in the high school, where teachers really saw themselves as content experts and really were uncomfortable with having non-academic conversations with their kids. And when I get into the advisory program part of this talk, I'll speak more to that. And so I think, from the reading I've done and the conversations I've had with the self-study team, there was the belief that you could go through K-12 and have an amazing, warm experience through the vast majority of your career, and you could also have a really uneven experience. And so this call was simply for us to kind of develop a common language, make your program coherent, adopt a set of standards that make sense for your school. Then in 2017, which was about the time I had my second research, so I identify as an English teacher, but my passion project for the last 12 years has been advisories. I have 2 kids who went through Punahou, and they both, because of the sports that they played, had intact communities. They had people who cared for them. Lucky for our family was they didn't struggle academically, so it wasn't like they encountered sort of the challenges that many children do. And I still felt that they could have had more care. And so after they graduated and I became an empty nester, I really just kind of became obsessive with the idea of who's caring for everybody else's kids. And I kept thinking that the assumptions we make about what our kids come to us with are maybe a bit rose-colored, and that children probably needed more care and more attention. And then again, we're huge, and we don't have, so there were lots of pockets of time that children would be on our campus, unsupervised, without a lot of guidance, and just seemed like, it just seemed like it was an opportunity to be explored. So that was 2017. I was actually in the process of applying for a fellowship. At Punahou, we have these research opportunities that if you have a question that's pressing, you can go and apply for money, and they'll give you either money or time or both to work on a research project for the school. And I thought, I haven't done a research project in a while. I would really like to do some work on the advisories. And so I talked to Emily and said, what do you think? And she said, how about instead, if we put you in this other department, and I'll put advisories in there, then you can just kind of reinvent the whole department. And I thought, my husband said afterwards, you didn't have to say yes. But it's like she just put that little carrot there that said, you can do advisories the way you want. And I was like, okay. So in the beginning of last year, a counselor named Bennett and I took over this department, and that's what the rest of this talk is about, is like we started a research initiative to redesign everything with the goal of trying to understand how to best care for our particular student population in the 4-year journey that they have in high school. And we had, and just around the same time we were appointed, we had a woman named Molly and a woman named Kirsten were appointed to do similar work, K8. So I'll try to insert some of that stuff. So 2019, 2020 is kind of where we are, and I'll go into that in more detail about that. I've been here for 2 days, so I put this slide in because it's funny how much progress is made in a year, because a year ago I was still introducing CASEL, and I was still introducing just sort of the notion of SEL, but pretty much everything I've heard over the last 3 days means the case has been made. So if you want, we can come back to this later if you want. But this slide, which is from the actual CASEL website, is if you're still making the case for your constituencies, I would recommend you go to the CASEL site and find this slide, because this kind of lays out the map that we followed, in the sense that we said we spent a year doing research on what would it look like in our school, how would we take pure academic courses and morph them into courses that also provided an SEL framework. And then we have a lot of, and like everybody, we have teachers who have no extra time to do stuff. We have teachers that are pulled in a bunch of different directions. We have administrators that are serving multiple masters. Because we're an independent school, we also have stakeholders who feel they should have voice. And I think stakeholders deserve to have voice. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have voice, but maybe how they do that voice should probably be guided in a certain way. So we've kind of used this sort of seemingly simple slide an awful lot, because behind each of those, like positive social behavior, fewer conduct problems, there's a ton of data. So we use this as kind of our little thread to get people's attention, and then we use this. So if you're still making the case in your community, this is a good place to start. So for our community, when Bennett and I started doing our work last year, we realized that not only did we have a flawed assumptions about our kids, we realized early on that we didn't know an awful lot about, beyond sort of the social level. Like, I was an English teacher, I supervised the literary magazine, so I had lots of friends at school, but I didn't really have a deep understanding of how my colleagues felt about their responsibilities towards children beyond the content they were teaching them. And so we started asking questions about students, and surprisingly, when we started talking about mastery and mastery learning, I had a number of kids who said, Auntie Mo, I want to go to Harvard. I do not do anything with the grading until I'm out of high school, because I got this. I have 11 AP courses, and I'm taking 3 languages. Sorry, so I'm not talking about you or any one of your friends. So there were certain kids who were like really scared, like, even though they didn't agree with the sort of GPA thing, and even though they didn't really feel that they were being effectively represented in their transcript, it was something they knew and understood. And it's kind of like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And so there was a lot of resistance, and I expected it to come from the parents and not the kids, but it was actually the other way around. The parents were like, please tell me how to talk to my child. And the kids were like, please tell me how to get into Harvard. And so it was a really kind of scary thing. So that was kind of the first basket of research we did. The second was, talking to our teacher colleagues, finding out their capacity to, and their interest in shifting the way they spent time with their children. We have another thing that is, it's pretty free. I mean, you have to have a substitute here and there, but if you've not yet shadowed a student, that is especially in that middle and high school, if you can spend a day shadowing a kid, well, okay, transform my teaching. I do a whole bunch of different stuff that I didn't do before I shadowed a kid for the first time. This one student actually had to go and study for her Spanish test in a cubicle in a bathroom because that was the only time she had like uninterrupted space, which I felt just terrible for her. And I didn't realize that although I have not a fancy office, I do have a space that if I need some privacy or 10 minutes alone, I have there several spaces at my school. Those things aren't available to our kids. So we started looking at, and again, teachers are very, or can be, sorry, not all teachers. Teachers can be very, feel very vulnerable when you start talking about their classes, their curriculum, and the broader courses that they teach. A lot of teachers at our school really feel, or I'm surprised at how closely their identities are attached to the, I'm the AP blah, blah, blah teacher. I always think that I didn't think that that was our school, but I guess it is. And I think every school has, so I guess if you're looking at changing your culture or working on infusing SEL, don't make the assumption that you know your culture, even though I felt I'd been there a while. I was also the teacher that said, there's no way we're ever going to have a dress code, and that happened in 2004. So apparently I don't know a lot about one of the other questions is, we've long marked, like if you go to our website, we're a college preparatory school. We're not as we also say things like the whole child, and we value the arts and we value the athletics, but we do definitely see ourselves as a college prep school. And so when they infuse the 21st century skills and colleges start talking about mastery and throwing away SAT scores for their, then like what does that mean for us? And thankfully those things are still above my pay grade, but they're questions that fall into our classrooms, and teachers definitely talk about it. So as I'm trying to get them to buy into a more devoted advisory program, I'm also knowing that they're feeling that insecurity that they might lose their AP course. So there's like lots of levers being pulled at this time. So you have to definitely pay attention to stuff. Then the third was just the community stakeholders, and that's sort of our alumni, that's our business partners. We have Dr. Scott really believed in making us a private school with a public purpose. So we have lots and lots and lots of friends and partnerships beyond our campus walls. And so as we start to tinker with who we are, that obviously impacts who people think we are, and also our value proposition in the community. And then the last thing, this was actually the funniest part, was as I was reimagining advisories and reimagining what SEL might look like, one of the biggest constraints I came up with was that we don't have enough classrooms. And so what I was imagining as these really cool opportunities for people to engage with kids and kids to engage with one another was we don't have enough classrooms that are available for us to do half of what we, and so that would, like, this is stuff that like technically wouldn't cost money, except that we don't have enough rooms to do it. So it's just kind of an interesting, so those are the way we organized it was like students and their families, the curriculum, teaching and learning, and so that's like both the lessons and the people who teach them, then the people beyond our walls, and then our infrastructure. And I organized it that way. Like that worked for us, but I also think that would work for another school system that didn't have the same types of resources we did. I mentioned earlier, so we decided, because I think part of it is our size. I've looked all over the country for programs that match us, but we're so much bigger than most schools that our closest comparison are some big public school districts in New York. And there's one in Palo Alto, but it's also like a public school that has similar, they've got like 2,000 kids from grades 9 through 12. But so we realized pretty early on that whatever we did, we'd probably have to invent, but we also didn't want to invent everything. So I'll share with you, there's actually 2 programs that are available that we're adopting that are things that we're not designing ourselves. But like the whole CASTLE's not a framework, not a program, and yeah, okay. When I first came to Schools of the Future, I wanted to buy CASEL, like as my program for Punahou. So I've learned a lot in 4 years. One of the things that I think that's affected our journey the most is we realized as we were looking initially for an advisory program or an advisory framework, we realized, and this led us, the first initiative is we've adopted the ruler approach, which is the emotions matter stuff from Yale. And I first heard Mark Brackett speak at Schools of the Future, I think 4 years ago, and he was awesome. I think we initially were hoping it would just go straight, or we initially imagined it would just go straight into the kids, and that would be that. But we spent 3 years, we talked to St. Andrew's Priory, we've talked to the Community Foundation and all the, like a bunch of the different places that are looking at ruler. I'm not paid by them or anything, but if you're looking at an approach, the reason we picked ruler, we announced it in February, we're just doing the rollout now, is ruler basically starts with the foundation that emotions affect everything we do, the decisions we make, the relationships we have, our health and well-being. If we don't acknowledge that, then we're sort of limiting ourselves, and it also leads to long-term non-healthy consequences. And so that's their sort of foundational, and it's, you know, Mary Ellen said it much better than I would yesterday, but I think most of us in education have come to the understanding that yes, we know that. But where I like ruler is that Mark Brackett is saying, but as adults, we've long been told we're not allowed to have those emotions in our space at work. And so they talk a lot about the emotional labor of trying to set aside how you feel and not acknowledging it. And so the sort of #1 rule of the ruler implementation is it's the adults get it first, and they use it for an entire school year at least before they start introducing it to the kids. And so we've done all our faculty K-12, and in just the first 2 pieces, which is introducing them to the emotions matter mindset and then developing the charter. And then after Christmas or after the winter break, we're hoping to do the rest of our administrators and anybody who touches kids, like our cafeteria staff, our security guards, our custodians, the secretaries, the admissions office. So anybody who has direct impact with kids, we hope to have introduced to the ruler approach before spring break. And then we'll do kind of a gut check to see, are we ready to introduce it to the kids in the fall? And so our hope is that we'll be able to roll out sort of ruler phase 2 for the adults next fall, and then begin to introduce it. And what in the junior school, which is our K-8, ruler will live in classrooms. So each grade will have sort of a ruler structure. And then in the high school, we're imagining for the kids it will live in their advisory. So it's just the 2 different ways the schools are. So that's the first sort of external purchased tool that we're buying. It's also pretty cost effective. So they do training here, they do training on the West Coast, they do training at Yale. It's kind of a train the trainer model. I can talk more about that, but I definitely don't feel like I'm an authority. But that was one of our assistant principal, who's this woman with moxie. She, in making the case to us about like, why are we doing this now? She said she left a lot of meetings last year feeling super icky. And she said she felt a number of people left those meetings too feeling rather icky themselves. But a year ago in our school, there wasn't a language to use, and nobody had permission to talk about how they felt. And so by us signaling K-12, including all the way up to our trustees, that we're adopting the ruler approach, it's almost like the first big step is saying, as a school, we're giving you permission to acknowledge the emotions that you've always had. You know, and that alone, I'm getting chicken skin, because it's already, like they always say, if you do it properly, it transforms your school. And there has to be like fidelity and ongoing maintenance and everything. But I can see already that people who didn't feel trusted are starting to feel like, okay, I don't know if I really want to tell you how I feel, but I'm actually starting to think I might someday. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction for us. Anyway, I got distracted by the emotions matter. I have not taught either of those young women. I just like the pictures. A slide without pictures. They're from our hula hoop pageant. So this is our first discussion opportunity. So when we were imagining what we would do with SEL, like if you go to those, the reason I put those slides in initially is it's so obvious. Like when CASEL says, emotional intelligence is people's understanding of how emotions matter in their lives and how they influence their discipline. Like, it sounds so obvious. And that someone who possesses great emotional intelligence is able to, you know, regulate their own emotions and adjust their behavior accordingly and witness the impact of emotions on others. Like, it just seems so obvious. But what we realized is, okay, so how do you do that? How do you go from like where you are to where you want to be? Like, what are those steps? So we visited, the way we do research is, I mean, we do all the readings and the journal readings and we go to conferences and stuff, but a lot of our PD involves finding a school and going and visiting. So in the last probably 4 years, I probably visited 20 schools in Hawaii, on the West Coast, and on the East Coast. I never go to any conference without spending at least a day and a half. And I'll email, and if you're from here, if you email and say, hi, I'm from Hawaii, and I'm coming to a conference, that's like the easiest door opener. It doesn't matter if you're fancy or not. You can just say, I'm from Hawaii, I'm super low maintenance, I will bring chocolate, and I haven't had a school turn me down yet, I don't have any connections anywhere. So we visited this school in Palo Alto. It was a K-6 school, and they were like, it was, they said that it was originally created for kids that had ADD, ADHD, like sort of high spectrum kids. And so they said, like, we ooze SEL because that's the only way we can get through to our kids. And so now it's kind of like you have to have like a high IQ as well as these other things. So they're still trying to re-envision themselves. But when we met with the school and we spent a day with them, we really liked the way they talked about when I was talking to you about our advisory program, that's essentially the integrated SEL. So it's in a classroom, it's woven into some lessons, it's part of the culture, kind of. But this school that we visited in Palo Alto, they were saying, no, you need to be imagining your SEL in all areas of your school. So the implicit is part of the culture, and that's where Ruler shines. So that's your foundational. If it's part of your culture, it's in the way your parents engage with one another. It's the way your security guard tells the people where to park. It's where your cafeteria people like handle the children who are having a rough day at lunch, because they're the ones who see the kids in the non-structured spaces. So unless you get it part of your culture, you aren't ever going to sort of fully achieve what you need. And that's probably the hardest one. So we actually spent the longest time, we knew pretty early on, we like lesson designing. That's one of the things that we enjoy as a school community. It's a way to collaborate with others. So we knew pretty early on that we'd probably be designing the explicit stuff on our own, but we weren't sure how to do the implicit or the integrated. So the first step in our learning was we adopted Ruler as a way of having that. So we're going to develop a vocabulary of what it means to have emotions. We're going to develop agreements about how we're going to teach each other or treat each other, and we're going to model that in our behaviors with each other and with our students. Then we decided we also needed to investigate sort of what do the other two pieces look like, and so the rest of the integrating the explicit we're designing on our own, except that when I said that we needed to talk to teachers and learn from them what they were interested in, many of our teachers said, I need a math problem between my kid and me in order to have a conversation with him, or I need a poem. Like, some of the teachers that I thought were just awesome and would be the best advisory teachers on the planet were terrified. So we did some more research, we talked to some more schools, and about 3 or 4 of the schools that had what I considered to be like marquee advisory programs, they had all their non-counselors go through Stanley King training. So if you haven't signed up on the little sign-in sheet, if you're interested in doing any work with us at any point, just make sure you sign in before you leave. Because several schools on the mainland recommended Stanley King as it's basically a deep listening training for advisory teachers and not counselors. And I did it in Colorado last summer. So cool. It's, and I was one of those teachers who you need help with your college essay, I got you. You need help looking at a resume, or you want to role play an internship interview, I got you. But don't come and tell me your boyfriend hit you, right? Like, that was something that I'd be like, I don't know what to, like, right? And even though the kids call me Auntie Mo and I'm super comfortable with them, but I didn't know, I couldn't solve that problem, right? And so what Stanley King teaches you is how to receive that information in an advisory capacity, and then it helps the schools figure out, what do you do next? And so we're doing 2 strands of work in that area, in the sense that we're going to get all our advisory teachers from grades 6 through 12 through the Stanley King training. That's like 200 people. And then we're also developing protocols. So we have like a teacher referral form, we have a self-referral form, we have a friend referral form, and then we already have relationships with the grade level deans. If they notice something in a class, we get the kids to us. So that the advisory teacher no longer has to be afraid of receiving information that she or he has no training to deal with. All they have to do is create the safe environment. Not all they have to do, how easy is that? Just create a safe environment, and then you got this. So once they've created, so they can have more courage in creating that safe environment, because we're putting systems in place to take the handoff. And it's scary to do that kind of work, but then you think, okay, but what if I didn't do it? And what if this child was left without any system of support to help her or him through some of the awful things that happen in adolescence? So in the integrated area, and actually also the explicit area, the other partnership we've created is with the Stanley King folks. So they do 2 institutes in the summer. One is on the East Coast, New Hampshire, I think, and that's in June, and then they do another one in August in Colorado Springs. If you have the PD money, I highly recommend doing it. It's just, you stay in the dorms, which is kind of cool, but you're up in Colorado air, and it's amazing. They also work you, it's like morning, noon, and night. They, after supper, they put you back into groups, and you have to do more role play, so it's super intense. We obviously can't afford to send 200 people for that. So what we've done is, last spring we contracted Stanley King to spend 4 days with us on our campus, and they ran mini workshops at our school. And after last year was finished, we said, you know, we should really do this slightly bigger and invite other Oahu school or other Hawaii schools who want to do that training to join us, because I think it would be richer for our teachers, and it would be just so we've already contracted them for March of this, like March 2020. So if you're at all interested in that kind, we haven't figured out what that's going to look like, but it wouldn't be intended as a moneymaker for us, just more like we're bringing them anyway, and so if we can find a way to have others join us, I think it would be better for both our teachers and for the other teachers. So that's Stanley King. So if you want to just take a pause, and I'll get a sip of water. Think for a second, and you can chat with people or just pause. This was actually, it seems like a simple slide, but if you were thinking about your own school setting or your own school context, what would your strategy be, or might it be? And how might you tackle those? I don't know if these slides are useful to you, but I will also provide them. So this is the aims of a Punahou. So with us, as I said, everything we did, we started looking at, okay, what are we going to do to build our culture? What are we going to do to get it into our classrooms and have our, one of the measures of success is we said, if you do warm SEL stuff in chapel and advisory, but nowhere else, that's not successful. So we said it had to be part of our culture. We were prepared to actually teach explicit skills, but it also had to be present in other aspects of our school community. And then our guiding framework was the aims of a Punahou education that Dr. Scott wrote, which again is lofty and aspirational. But we realized that for us, and it's interesting that Jenny was talking about story today, because we have Kwahilani Center for Hawaiian Studies at our school, and we have this like super wise woman who just intimidates me to pieces, but she's like, Maureen, it's not, okay, this is how scary she is. I said, I'm gonna try to do this SEL program, I want it to be place-based. And the first question she said to me is every person teaching in your program, and I had 13 teachers at this point, a person you would want your very own children to grow up to become? And I was like, crickets. And then she said, okay, well, go back and start over. So then I had to go back and tell these people I had contracted to teach that they couldn't teach with us anymore because they weren't like embodying all the qualities. So then, which was super awkward, and my principal was really nice about it. And the next thing she said is, because I said I really want it to be like, and I'm of course from Saskatchewan, which is north of Montana, and she was like, it's not about everybody becoming Hawaiian, because that doesn't make any sense, because everybody can't become like Hawaiian cultural practitioners. But she said what you need to do is every person needs to understand their own story. And she said, like, Maureen, your kuleana for this place began when you arrived here with your family in 2001. And you brought with it a story of your family and what made you come here. And the minute you arrived, you have like an obligation and a responsibility to be here properly. And so I was like, that's so cool, how do we do it? And so the first thing she did is, I haven't been in the ocean in like 26 years because I had a really bad experience body surfing in Mexico when my children were babies. And I thought, no, if I stay there on the sand and the waves stay on the water, we're good. So she said, no, 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 you need to create a sense of place. So she made me get, I don't know if you know Marion Lyman Mercero, she was on Hokulea when it tipped over back in the day. Her son teaches PE at our school. And so she made me get him and 2 other surfing coaches, and we went to Waikiki at 7 in the morning, and she put us in the ocean, and we learned to surf together. And we had to be in the water together. They taught us, it was awful. I mean, I was very proud of myself, I did it. But it was the most transformative experience for our team, because though I'd put into place these 13 teachers from 5 different departments, and one taught math, one was a French teacher, but they were the right people. But we didn't have a curriculum, we didn't have a lesson framework, and we didn't really know each other that well. But I knew that they were the right people, so she made us do this together, and I'm so grateful that she did, because it put us basically in the same canoe. I'm switching from surfing to, but I'm from the prairies, who knows? But so now when I look at that sense of place, I totally understand it. So after we did the surfing exercise together, we went and got the sand out of our hair, and we went back to Kwahilani, and she talked to us about sense of place, and she's called it ku, which is like the KU, and I'm sorry for everyone who's like actually knows Hawaiian as a practitioner, but it's, as she said, is ku is like where you stand, and then also who do you stand, like what is the shadow like of your parents and your ancestors, and then what skills do you need to stand up, and then what do you stand for? And so that ku has become sort of the core of our thinking about what we're trying to do. So it's not about becoming Hawaiian. It's about coming to understand your own story, and then knowing what that part of your story makes you as like a foundation of the person you could become. And then, so if you look at those words, if you think about it in that respect, like ku and who am I and what do I stand for, then looking at sense of place and having a sense of purpose means a lot more. Right? So that's one of the core things we're doing with our kids, is we're saying, we're spending the whole fall with them just talking about who they are as people, where are they from, what does it mean to them, but we're overlaying it with this sense of ku, which is cool. So that's our guiding framework. And again, we're just in the very beginning of year 2. We also, so the department that I moved into had been around for about 30 years, but it was a traditional type psychology department that was, I don't want to say weakness-based, but it was the problems, like, you know how psychology used to, before the positive psych and UPenn work, it was based on like, what are your deficiencies? You have this, you have that, and it's like, it was problem-based. So they had 4 areas. They had like a 9th grade guidance course, which was kind of like a basket of topics, like high school kids need to have access to blank. And it would be like everything from goal setting to, you know, drugs and alcohol risks to, you know, you name it, it was in this basket. It was just a crazy marathon of random lessons. There was a bunch of elective courses like sports psych and stuff, but that was kind of a smaller part. There were 2 counselors, but they weren't full-time, and they also taught the elective courses. So you could have a situation where a kid had a family incident and would end up in a counselor's office, and that counselor might be his sports psych teacher, right? So that was kind of messy. And then we had this thing called camp, which was this thing at the North Shore that wasn't really camp, and it had been around for a long time, and there was a lot of alumni love for it. It was not something, so that was before 18, so I started in August of 18 with Bennett. And then the first thing we did was, so last school year, we replaced camp with advisory. So advisory always existed, but we just canceled camp and said we need to rethink this outdoor ed thing. And then we took over advisory. And then this year, we're in kind of, so last year was primarily a research year for us. this year we added, when we started looking at the spaces, remember I was telling you about that last spot on of space, use of time in buildings? When we started asking questions, it turned out that every 9th grader had from 1 to 3 hours of assigned study hall time, but nobody knew what they were supposed to do. So when I asked my 9th graders that, sorry, yes, Syl was laughing. Isn't it crazy, right? Sorry, she's a former student. So I started asking questions. Turned out nobody was responsible for study hall. It just got assigned. When I asked my freshmen at the end of last year, okay, what was one thing, like in May, I said, okay, just write 2 pieces of advice for next year's incoming freshmen. What would they be? And one kid, like 60% of the kids said, I wish I didn't sleep in study hall. And then like upwards of 70% of the kids said, I wish I didn't watch Netflix in study hall. So I'm like, well, why would you be watching Netflix in study hall? So then I started asking questions of study hall advisors, and they're like, oh, well, was I supposed to look at what they were doing? So that you either were an advisory teacher, where you'd have these kids you were spending, and don't tell people about this, because Punahou has a reputation of being decent. But I would say, okay, so you're either taking care of these kids for 4 years. So if you're an advisory teacher, you have them from 9th grade right through to graduation. You go to prom, you go to skip day, you do all these things with them. Or you have 2 hours of air conditioning lesson planning time in a room with children. The only rule for study hall was be quiet. So I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to work. Then we started looking at this other whole basket of work that we have called learning support. So when we started asking these questions, it turned out that nobody was responsible for them. So then they said, oh, okay, well, you guys take them, Mo and Bennett. And so now we sort of, in the spring of last year, all we had was advisory. But by the fall of this year, we had 4 or 5 new things. So Bennett takes care of the counseling and responsive services. So we actually now also, as part of our figuring out how to care for children, we have a crisis response team, so that if a child does, and those things existed in our school before, but what we've noticed is that independent schools tend to lag behind public schools in this regard, because we're not governed by the same, it's not like we don't care for kids, but we just don't have the same sort of hurdles. And so that kind of care was handled on a much looser way, as I understand it from talking to different schools and consultants we worked with. So now we're in the process of formalizing all the protocols related to crisis response. We added an elective course this year called Positive Psych, based on the PERMA stuff at UPenn. We've started introducing, we canceled the 9th grade guidance course, and we've started working, and I'll show you a bit more about our new SEL course in a minute. And then we're trying to do a competency-based study hall, which I'm super excited about. So that study hall actually has lesson plans, like they're doing SMART goals. They're doing what kind of a learner am I, things like, you know, the Pomodoro study method, the Cornell note-taking method. They can't actually watch any videos, really. They've got a whole checklist of review things. So but and we're also redesigning the advisory program. So it's been busy so far. Some of the things, and I wanted to add this for you, some of the things that we discovered when we started mucking about with these different circles was the advisory teachers needed a lot of training. Most of them, and like me when I started, the day I discovered I had an advisory was the first day of school in 2006, when I looked on my schedule and I had an advisory. So now we have an advisory kind of teacher goal sheet, like the ideal advisor is blank. We have not really a job description, because we want it to be aspirational. So but an ideal advisor would be this way. We're working on a competency designed curriculum, so that in fact, if you can show that you can set goals and monitor them and manage them and are managing your time well, then you can probably kind of progress out of study hall in 9th grade. But if you don't show that you use your time well, you may end up having study hall through to midway through junior year. So that's kind of another new thing, because it seems to, like, this arbitrary line of everybody needs it to the end of 9th grade and then nobody needs it after that is clearly isn't based in science. Similarly with the SEL courses, we needed a ton of teacher training. We did some work with SEL, which is the Institute for Social Emotional Learning. They're based in San Francisco. They're expensive, but they're also really good at, if you have a school community where your teachers say, I am just a teacher of content. I cannot imagine ever incorporating any SEL stuff. They're good at that kind of stuff. If you have that capacity in your school, like we did this training with them and we thought, oh wait, we know how to do that stuff. So now we're doing that kind of training with our own teachers. Not saying that they aren't worth it, but some stuff we can do on our own. So then this was my second sort of conversation start, is once we got past our culture integrated and explicit teaching baskets, the next way we looked at it was, here are the things that our department is responsible for, and what are the structures we have to work in. Advisory doesn't meet every day in the high school. They meet every morning in the middle school, but not in the high school. And so we were saying, if we're trying to build community and you only meet every other day, that's a barrier, right? We wanted to be known as a department that people wanted to work with. So one of the ways we do it at Punahou is you propose elective courses and you partner with other people. Our department previously had been pretty insular from the other sort of academic disciplines. We wanted to be known as like the coolest department on campus. So like we host parties now and we have open houses. I like food. That was the best thing about coming to Hawaii, is like everything's about food, right? So we have, like, we host stuff and we partner with other people. And then we actually ended up we made the argument because we did some data collection, and so we went from having not quite 2 full-time counselors to now we have 4 full-time counselors. So we still don't feel like, we still feel very busy, but we're more than double the number of resources that we had a year ago. So we feel happy about that. So that's another way of looking at it, is like, what is your core business, which is, in my case, it's the 2 yellow circles. And then the navy circles, which look kind of washed out, are kind of the areas that we were growing. So that's another kind of way of looking at your work. Okay, so the rest of this talk is just kind of that one, advisory and the elective courses, because I feel like this was so research-based that I thought it might be helpful to the audience. So what we did is we began with the new SEL courses that we were introducing, and we had essential questions for those that were basically, we did kind of an inventory of all the things that we ever imagined offering, and then all the things that were offered in any of the previous courses that had ever been taught by that department. And then we looked at a bunch of benchmark programs. And we said that for our school, knowing that sense of place and knowing that sense of purpose, we said, what if we came up with 3 essential questions? And I mean, it's funny, they mean so much to me, but they seem really simple. But that, who am I? So looking at it as self-lens, who am I, what am I good at, what makes me me? And that can include everything from my friendships, my relationships, the personal skill sets I have, my aspirations, the thing that I feel like I want to do with the rest of my life. Then how am I connected to others? And in that way, we see, like, every child, I think, in this day and age feels entitled, so I don't think it's like a Punahou entitlement, but I think there's a sense of entitlement, and we really are sensitive to that, because there's kids who have and kids who have not, but then there's also just regular kids, and we don't want anybody to feel like that they're somebody special because they're at our school. We want them to feel that our school is special because they chose to go there, but we also feel that being a part of a community is a privilege, and there's a responsibility to being part of that community. And so the whole connections is like, if I'm going to be connected to others, how do I cultivate positive connections? How do I reinforce the positive side, whether it's my friends, my family, my school community, my team sport, my church group? And then, kind of beyond the connections, it's what are the communities I choose to belong to and the ones that I belong to anyway. So, and then how do you cultivate and contribute positively to those communities? So the way we're organizing the course right now is the fall term is essentially looking at those things from a self lens, and then the spring term is looking at them from an other lens. And we're in our first year, but it seems pretty good. And then, so the purpose of advisory is to practice those skills. So the foundational goal of advisory is a place where children feel welcome, known, and safe. We're a big school. Advisory is the only place that stays together for 4 years. And then the second goal is to practice the skills they're learning in the SEL course. And so far, we've done a few things this year. Our advisories used to be huge. We had 30, we used to have 22 kids per advisory. So you can't do anything meaningful if you see them like once a cycle legitimately. Like you barely know them. So I did a huge campaign to get people who weren't regular classroom teachers. Like there was all these assumptions like you had to be a classroom teacher to be an advisory teacher. Well, tons of schools have people that aren't classroom teachers serving it because there are lots of, and having non-classroom teachers be advisory teacher builds sort of school allegiance. It breaks down barriers and silos because you're kind of all in it together and caring for these wacky teenagers. So this year, our class of 2023, we went from 20 advisory teachers when the last class graduated to 36, and which allowed us to take the average class size down from 22 to 18. Our goal is to get to 1 in 10 or 1 in 12. Because we don't have enough classrooms, a lot of the things we're doing is we're creating advisory teacher pairs. So we have the 36 advisories are actually 36 advisory teachers are in 24 advisories. So 12 of the advisory teachers are pairs. So that's 18 kids for 2 teachers. So that's way better than 22 kids for 1 teacher. We created advisory HUIs. So our school's huge. So we have every 4 advisory belongs to a HUI. And so they do activities together. So you've got your 18 kids, and then you belong to a group of 72 kids, which seems way better than 450. Right, so we've started, those came simply out of sort of, you know, how mother, like necessity and all that. So we didn't have enough classrooms. We also didn't have enough people who were classroom teachers who had experience working directly with kids. And then we also had a bunch of new teachers to our school, so we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave anybody, like we wanted to set people up to win. So the HUI was actually kind of like the stroke of genius, but it ended up being like a really meaningful thing, but it was actually a problem-solving tool. So, this is the core of our teaching program. So I said earlier that Jim created that aims of a Punahou education. What our new assistant principal, the one who said she felt icky last year, she's a competency master in my mind. She claims that she is not, but I believe she is. So she spent all of last year working with our leadership team and all the teachers and some students and some parents and some alumni, taking the aims of a Punahou education and designing a competency architecture so that we're still going to have A through F and we're still going to have AP courses and stuff, but we're going to start to assess what we value. So my team, we had a retreat last spring, and we chose 8 of the 50 for our class. And so we have, and they make sense. And one of our best activities for our teaching team was to take the 8 that we chose and we mapped them to the CASEL wheel, because one of the tests of CASEL is any program you adopt has to effectively address all 5 elements of the wheel. So the 8 we picked because they made the most sense for us. And then we did a gap analysis to make sure that what we were choosing made sense and was complete. And this again is probably similar to what a lot of schools are doing, but where the richness of this work came is giving your teachers voice. So letting them identify what they feel your course should be focusing on, and then giving them the opportunity to work together. So we did this as a half, we did a bunch of things, but the kickoff of the retreat was looking at the competencies of the CASEL wheel and looking at the competencies that we had chosen for our school, and then having them map together and then figuring out what that would look like in a classroom. So that was a really rich activity. So we don't need to go over this. So each competency has like a descriptor statement, and then it has a scaffolding of skills. So in honor, self, and place, it begins with students can develop a variety of strategies to promote health and well-being for themselves now and in the future. And then the beginning is, so the first base level is I cultivate my self-awareness and my mental and emotional resilience. So that's ruler work we'll be doing. And then once I make sleep, dietary, and lifestyle choices to optimize my health. And then I pursue interests that bring me fulfillment. So that top honor, self, and place, which is a self-management competency, the focus of 9th grade is just knowing that first definition and then working on that first self-awareness and emotions. Then in 10th grade, we're going to focus on sleep and wellness. And then 11th and 12th grade is moving towards what do you want to be past Punahou. Does that make sense? So the structures of our, and I'm pretty sure our competencies are a public document. If you're interested, and they're not, I'll try to get you a copy. But it was a lot of work but it really helped our school kind of align around some teaching principles. And then the cool thing is, in my classes, we have these 8 competencies. When I look at, and this is for 9th grade, currently what you learn the competencies that we're working on in our 9th grade classes are 3 of them are also being pursued in biology, and then 2 additional ones are being pursued in English. So if you're a 9th grade kid, you're getting these competencies in a bunch of different places. It's not just I'm happy and well in Auntie Mo's class. You know, the honor, embrace challenge, and empathize and honor self and place are the 3 that overlap with biology. So we had fun doing that too, because we're saying all these people that have contact with freshmen, what are we doing with them? And it was nice to see that it wasn't like a complete, you know, set of discrete. So then that's the other. So we spend a lot of work in the castle. We spend a lot of time in the castle where we basically test everything we do against that. It's such rich research. They've got tons, and like if you haven't spent time on their website, it's kind of deep and scary. But there's so many resources on that site. They've got like videos, they've got manuals, they've got assessment guides. The people at Castle are really, really responsive. So this was not my training. Competencies were relatively new to me, like 3 years ago. So I've leaned a lot on the Castle site just to kind of understand what that means for me and my students. And here's another example. So what we did is these little boxes with the colored bars are the actual competencies from the Castle website. And then what we did is for each of our classes, we don't see the kids very frequently, and we wanted them to be centered and focused pretty quickly. And we also wanted to give them tools that they could use in other classes. So for example, the notice and care check-in is actually is part of the empathy skill, which is social awareness. So at the beginning of our class, the kids we spend the first month teaching them the rituals and why rituals are important. And there's some really good research out of Harvard, and I can't think of the guy's name right now, but he does some really good TED Talks on the place of rituals and how they build shared understanding and community. And so not like the bad rituals, but the good, healthy rituals. And so we've been teaching the freshmen and sophomores these rituals and saying, like, you know, you can use the rituals. If you find that you're feeling all anxious in the morning, you could do that little emotions check-in and go, oh, I have a Spanish test at 2:30. I probably can't sustain this worry from 9:30 to 2:30. I need to figure out how to shift. And so we've been teaching them, that's some ruler stuff. The notice and care check-in is we had them do an activity where they identified someone who had helped them and shown kindness towards them, and then we had them create a situation where they could do something similar to someone else. So the notice and care, so as we're leaving, an exit ticket on a notice and care day will be go and find someone over the next few days to, you know, reach out and give them that kindness that they need. And then their check-in in the following cycle will be, they'll share what they did. And it's funny, like they seem so easy and so not really, you know, scholarly or deep pedagogy, but it transforms the behavior of the children. They look forward, they're like, compared to where we were a year ago with this class, like in terms of comparing curriculum to curriculum, in cycle 6, which is where we are now, the kids are looking forward to coming to class to sharing what they have done successfully over the past week. And one of our sort of non-written themes is like the notion of agency and ownership. And so these rituals are opportunities for the kids to show agency and to show ownership. And that makes a difference, as Mary Ellen was telling us yesterday, or Mary Helen. Oh, this last thing, so this is where study hall fits. So the 3 pieces are advisory, our SEL curriculum, and study hall. And study hall is focusing on the self-management, self-awareness, and so we're working on building curriculum in those areas to help the kids like know who they are as learners, know what strengths they have, know where their deficiencies are. They're doing SMART goals. They're learning how to write emails to their teachers. You know, they're learning how to review. They're learning how to practice a conversation with their parents when interims come out, you know, like that kind of stuff. So focused on, well, and it's so funny because, like, if you've ever, like, you know, when you had the conversations, the kids are thinking this and the parents are thinking that, and it's literally a train track. You know, like they never ever, you have to just force them together. So we're trying to create those kinds of spaces. So this is kind of where we are. So the last thing is we're working on smaller advisories. We're working on teacher training through Stanley King. We're working on referrals to our counseling team. We've introduced the first 2 SEL courses. We're going to add 1 more next year and 1 more the following year. We've adopted Ruler, or we're in the process of adopting Ruler, which I can't speak highly enough. Scary, but good. We're also looking at the use of buildings, time, and space. It's funny because we've had this modular schedule for, I think, 30 years, and it's supposed to be this uber flexible thing. But my principal said recently, she's like, Mo, the work you and Bennett are doing is so great, you're going to blow up the schedule 5 years ahead of what we planned. And I think, is that a good thing? But I think that is a good thing, but because we're looking at what kid time. But I mean, the funny thing is it's Hawaii. Everyone knows we should start class at 9 in the morning or 8:30. But parents are still going to drop their kids off at our school at 6:15. So I'm saying, why don't we have study hall every morning, and we could have sleeping bags and pillows, and the kids could, you know, come and sleep and then have breakfast and maybe get some coaching, you know, and then start class at 8:30. So we'll see. I can't remember if there's more. Oh, that's it. So I don't know if we have any time. Oh, sorry, I think it's overtime. Sorry. I didn't know how long. I thought it would be quicker than that. If you have questions, I'm here. I think you have 15 minutes or 30 minutes. 30 minutes? Guess the next one. Anyway, thanks for your patience. Nobody fell asleep. That's always a good sign. The 2 things we're looking at hosting are just like a general conversation about SEL at our school. And then also we are definitely bringing Stanley King in, so we're hoping to open it up to other teachers. So if either of those things appeal to you, just make sure you add your name to the list. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.